Welcome to the Charity Changemakers podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and action for the changemakers of the world. Each week, we dive deep into the world of impactful charities. We connect you with the passionate leaders, the innovative ideas, and the real-world stories that are making a difference. Whether you're a seasoned non-profit professional or just starting out, this podcast is your chance to learn from the best and get fired up to make a positive change. We'll explore the challenges and triumphs of running a successful charity. We'll hear about the fundraising strategies, impactful programs, and the stories of the people whose lives are being transformed. But most importantly, we'll leave you feeling empowered and equipped to take action in your community and the organisations in which you work. So, buckle up, Changemakers, because we're about to embark on a journey of inspiration and impact.
Today on the Charity Changemakers podcast, I'm joined by Richard Corbett, who's the Chief Executive of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance. Richard's got a really fascinating career journey, having started in the military and then working within international aid, working in places like Afghanistan and Sierra Leone, taking that international learning to then working within organisations like Oxfam, as well as being Chief Executive within some smaller local organisations before joining Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance nearly 3 years ago. Really fascinating career journey. You're going to really enjoy some of the insights and learnings that we can take from Richard, from managing and learning within times of crisis to facilitating individuals, partners, teams for bringing out the best within them, as well as looking at the difference between fundraising and engagement, or the similarities that you can find across those two different words. Anyway, it's enough from me. Let's get on and meet our changemaker. It's great to welcome Richard to the Charity Changemakers podcast today. Richard, thanks for making some time to come and share with us today.
It's good to be with you, Adam.
Yeah, great. Lovely. Thank you. And how are you doing today?
Very good. Yeah, no, having a good day so far.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's great. And look, we like to take the opportunity for our listeners, for the audience, to get to know you a little bit. So we fire the same question, 3 questions at each of our guests. So going to follow in that same pattern today. So tell me, Richard, where's the best place you've ever visited?
Well, I went for the most kind of interesting in that my background, we'll talk later, but I've worked overseas quite a lot. And I spent a while in Afghanistan, and on one time got to go into the hills around it, outside of the area where I lived, and go to areas where people just don't get to go. And so I think that's really what made it for me, was just somewhere where way off the beaten track and seeing something completely different.
Yeah, and like you say, completely remote, and I imagine some amazing scenery and views that you can experience out there with I guess not many people, like you say, around you.
Yeah, no, and a completely different environment where you get out, you get into the hills, there's nobody around. I was there in '96, so it was prior to all the more recent incidents, and people they'd see me and they'd be slightly worried that maybe I was Russian rather than anything else because of the previous history. But and you'd stay in these houses where they tended to have these large walled gardens, and in those gardens they'd be growing kind of fruit, pomegranates, melons, grapes, and so it was just these oases of all this kind of fruit and vegetation within this very arid landscape. So it was truly very, very different.
Yeah. Well, we're a few episodes into the podcast now, but no one's given Afghanistan yet, and that's that answer. So you've definitely gone first with that. And tell me then, Richard, at the moment, what for our quickfire number 2? What are you reading at the moment?
I've actually just finished The Future of Geography by Tim Marshall.
Right. And tell me more about the
Yeah, so it's about space, basically. I've got one of my children is fascinated by space, and I suppose being my age, you kind of always think, oh yeah, you want to be an astronaut, and it's the kind of thing that will never happen. But in reading this book, just read so much more detail about the future of potentially mining in space, the robotics industry in space, etc. And you suddenly realize that far from being in this kind of thing that he will never achieve, he's looking at what is really on a growth trend of what a future industry, is likely to be. And so it not only was a really interesting book, but it also helped me very much relate to one of my kids' passion.
Yes, yeah, which is excellent. So yeah, that's great. And quick fire number 3 for you. Outside of work, what do you like to do to relax? What are your hobbies?
So traditionally, it's been running. So I've run 15 marathons, 6 of which have been in various fancy dress costumes. So that's been very much my background. But I've got to that age where whenever I go running now, I seem to break something. So I'm
Yes.
kind of transferring more to gardening than running. But really, my background has been very much about getting out there and having a bit of time on your own, kind of in your own little world, and getting through the rigors of the day by jogging around a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, look, people will be getting in touch with me if I don't ask. What was the favourite fancy dress costume that you've ever run in?
Yeah, probably centipede. So there were a team of us, 6 people in a centipede, running around the London Marathon, and it did it for a number of years. I did it in that costume for 1 year, but it carried on with the university I was at, and as a traditional thing to do. So they kind of run around each year, but we did that. And I actually, within the team that did that, was one of the other CEOs of one of the other air ambulances in the country. So we literally follow each other around.
Yes, yeah. No, that's brilliant. And presumably with 100 legs, you get a better time, do you not?
Exactly.
In a marathon.
We did cheat a little bit on the leg.
Great. Yeah. That's great, Richard, and really, thank you for answering those quickfire questions. It's great to find out a little bit more about you. I mean, obviously today that's kind of part of what the conversation is going to be about this journey into working in the charity sector, because you don't just rock up as chief executive of Hampshire Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance without a journey to. No, my bad. Exactly, yeah. But clearly, you don't just get there. There's a whole journey to becoming a chief executive. So it sounds. And for you, obviously, starting in the military, I'd love to find out about I guess that journey from there to getting into the sector and how that all came about.
Yeah. So originally, it's at the moment. My kids, I've got 2 kids doing exams, and one of them doing A-level. And when I did my A-levels, I didn't quite get the grades that I was hoping for. And so I was planning to go into the Army via university, but ended up going directly into the Army, and did a short service commission when I was kind of 18. So that really kind of set me up in terms of both the training you get and the kind of experience. But at that stage, it was very much around Germany and Northern Ireland as the kind of key places that you kind of got deployments. And so when I joined the Army to see the world, I hadn't seen a great deal of it, and got to the stage where it's like looking for what came next, and had the ambition to go back to university, but spent a bit of time traveling prior to that, to go and see the world. So I spent 18 months traveling around, spending my Army pension. At the age of 22, they kind of said, "Do you want a pension, or we'll just give you a lump sum?" And the lump sum at that point in your life seems very much more attractive. Probably something I might regret now, but I had a really interesting time traveling the world, saw some very different things, and that gave me that appetite for looking to have a career that went beyond the boundaries of the UK. So went back, went to university, and then looked to develop that career within the international development sector.
Yes, yeah. And when you say you came back and went to university, what was it that you went on to study?
I studied business studies, basically, at Aston University.
Yeah. With that intention then of getting into international base work.
So that was the plan.
Yeah. So coming out of university and obviously getting that qualification, what was the first step after that?
Well, and you have these plans, and then you kind of hit reality in the face, and you start applying for things, and you realise that it's the kind of area that it's difficult to step into your first job. It's one of those where you can't get a job without experience, but you can't get the job because you haven't got any experience. And I interviewed with an organisation called Merlin, which were the Medical Emergency Relief International. It's actually now part of Save the Children.
Right.
And I was fortunate in many ways that I was sat there in my interview, and the person interviewing me looked at me and thought he knew me from somewhere, and then figured out that, we had been at Sandhurst at the same time. And
Yes.
sometimes, those things come along in life and work in your favour. And I got my first job with them, which was actually in Afghanistan. So I made that step and then got that posting to Afghanistan.
Yes, yeah. And like you say, those networks and people that giving you that first opportunity. Paint the picture of going and working overseas, in Afghanistan, because for the vast majority of us, that's a very alien environment and type of setting, and I guess setting up there in that first role, within sector. Yeah, talk us through what that kind of looked and felt like.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was incredibly different to anything I'd done before. I'd spent 4 years in the army. I'd done sort of duty in Northern Ireland, etc. But going to somewhere like Afghanistan was culturally massively different, and the kind of work and the nature of the work was very different in the challenges that I faced. I was basically a logistician, so I worked with a team of doctors and nurses who were supporting both the hospital and also rural clinics. And it was really my job to make sure that the vehicles worked, the medicines were there, and all the bits and pieces that helped keep the organisation ticking over were in place, and paying a large local staff group that we had, and working with that group. Clearly, at that stage, the Taliban were in control of the area that I was working in. They hadn't got control of the whole country at that stage. And that led to a lot of restrictions on what you could do, and also the kind of working relationship with the Taliban, was challenging. They had at one stage I was in a team that was all female apart from myself, and so though I was relatively junior within that team, I'd end up having to do all the representation stuff, because they would only deal with a man in terms of the higher authorities within the Taliban. But you got to this ridiculous stage where you'd go into these meetings where I'd go in with our kind of lead doctor, and within 5 minutes of the start of the meeting, even though I had to do all the meet and greet, they would very quickly realise that I didn't have a clue what I was talking about. So they'd work directly with the medical director. But there was just kind of, as it were, playing the game, as it were, in terms of making sure that you respected the local traditions, etc., but also got the job done, and getting that balance right in those kind of contexts is often very difficult, because some of the things you have to work with, you maybe don't personally agree with the approaches, etc., but if you want to work in that environment, you have to get that balance.
Yeah. And clearly, with that, obviously, it was that opportunity to be across, a whole range of different, from the logistics, like you say, giving you that experience within, a whole range of different areas that I guess gave you that taste of that international, working in an international setting, which clearly was then the platform for future opportunities. So kind of talk us through that journey. What happened next?
Yeah, so I kind of jumped between various roles with Merlin for a number of years overseas. So I worked in Sierra Leone, the Congo, and Sudan. So doing similar kind of work, and eventually becoming kind of a project coordinator within some of those projects. And in each place got very different experiences. So and some of those were quite daunting in terms of in Sierra Leone. I was there at the time where, again, there was a rebel government which was displaced by West African peacekeeping forces, and so it was a very challenging time to be working there, and to be working with a local population who were going through, a really traumatic experience. And I think you get that lesson in life where because of who you are and that ability to just walk away. You can walk away sometimes when things get difficult, whereas for your local team, that's their home, that's their life. And one of the hardest things I've ever done is kind of when we had to evacuate at one stage is to leave the local team behind, as we were able to kind of get ourselves out of the country. So those experiences kind of build a platform where, and to this day, where certain problems will happen and you kind of think, well, actually, relatively, this is, you can deal with this, because relative to some of these things and some of the people I've worked with before have had to put themselves through and their families through, it can be relatively, an easier solution to some of these other things which people have had to face. So it was a really good background, both in terms of being resourceful in getting things done in difficult areas, but also in those learning about those relationships with different types of people and the kind of challenges that they might face.
Yeah, and presumably in the work that you're doing in a locality about building trust with obviously the individuals that you're there to support and to building that relationship. Presumably that makes up a huge amount of the work that you're carrying out.
Yeah, and I think in so many different contexts, ultimately the relationships are key to it. And I think in the development sector, it's all about communities and local communities and how you interact with those communities. And I think that plays forward to today, where you say, well, as an organisation, as an air ambulance, we are only there because of the community who support us. And even though the contexts are very different, a lot of the things there's a lot of commonality goes across, and the way that you're dealing and working with those different groups. So all these things provide learning for going forward.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose that military training as well means that there's a calmness in the way that you respond to crises or challenges or difficulties that come up in I guess a rather pragmatic type approach of, well, here's the problem and how we're going to sort it.
Yeah, hopefully I do that and I can deal with those things, and that's probably where it does come from. Yeah, but sometimes even my time in the military, it was a great experience. I never got shot at, whereas as an aid worker, then that was more regular occurrence. And so sometimes some of these experiences, you think they're going to come from different contexts, and as you move through life, things don't quite carry on as you might have thought.
Yes, yeah. So talk me about them working in such volatile scenarios then, and managing teams in those types of and your experiences, managing teams, both I guess people that are coming from an international context as well as those local teams working in such volatile, difficult, challenging circumstances, and your approach to I guess maintaining that calm and that delivery of service as best as you can in those difficult circumstances.
I think in both the army and the international work, one of the common things was that, I was a kind of 19-year-old troop commander, and basically there was somebody else, there was a staff sergeant who was very much pointing the way and helping and assisting. You move forward to the international context, and, we had senior members of local staff who were very much running the show on a day-to-day basis, and had that connection both with community and with our own teams. And I think there's a role there in terms of showing yourself as a facilitator rather than necessarily, trying to take over to be that day-to-day leader, because in certain contexts, you're just not the right person to do that. And as you move up the kind of the career ladder and get into the chief executive level, again, you can't be good at everything. There are different elements of the organization where you have to have trust in the team and in those that are directed to lead different parts of the team to deliver on that and provide help and support where you can and facilitate pulling the different parts of the team together. So I think, throughout my career, probably I've not had to be doing that thing where, I am the person who's fully responsible for this thing and driving it all through delivering day to day. I've been working with others who kind of doing that element of things and making it happen on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of, I suppose, in many ways been lucky to get that kind of background, which has given me that privileged position to be looking forward, looking out, looking about where we go next and all the rest of it, rather than being too much in the detail of what's going on now.
Yeah. And within that career progression that you talk about, obviously you ended up working for Oxfam, one of the largest charities, obviously based here, and working internationally again. Can you talk us a little bit through your experience of working with Oxfam and what that entailed?
Yeah, so after these years working overseas, I got to a point where I think I wanted to move back to a kind of more stable life balance, as it were. Took a brief spell. I decided to go back to university and did a master's in business studies, but I had a 6-month gap, so went hiking in the Atlas Mountains as a tour leader. So that was good fun.
Yeah,
I filled
amazing.
a hole, did an MBA, and then got a job in the head office at Oxfam eventually. That was working with their humanitarian department. So this was Oxfam Great Britain. Oxfam's a confederation of different Oxfams. And at that stage, Oxfam Great Britain was very much the dominant force. We delivered most of the programming, and within the humanitarian team, I managed a team of what they called humanitarian support personnel. So they were individuals who went around to different projects around the world. They were kind of very experienced, had worked in many different situations, and it was really providing support, making sure they were deployed adequately to different places, and looking after them when they were not on deployment, so when they were back in the UK. And I also managed a team of desk officers in Oxford who were looking at what was going on in different countries and supporting where they could in terms of resources that we could send out from Oxford to support different projects. I was there for about 4 years before I kind of, I think I got itchy feet. I'd rather be out there than sat in the headquarters. But and also thinking about what other areas of the charity sector within the UK I might work and move towards. So I kind of did one stint and then left, and then kind of a few years later, I kind of realised that actually I was drawn back to that international setting, and so went back to Oxfam again as the humanitarian lead for Oxfam Great Britain. And by that stage, it had changed quite a bit, the organisation, in that Oxfam International had taken over the delivery in the field, so overseas. It was all being delivered by kind of the umbrella Oxfam, and then the country Oxfams were more about providing funding. So they were raising funding both from public funding and also from government to invest in projects. So I went back to a very different organisation and a very different type of job. It was less operational, more facilitative. But spent another 5 years with them in that role. So in all, I was there for 8 years. And clearly, in the second stint at Oxfam, I had a number of different experiences, but the one people would be aware of was the Oxfam situation, which was again an interesting thing to live through, even though it was clearly very difficult, both for the organisation and for a lot of people personally, and it was a very difficult time.
And it'd be interesting to, depending on what you can share, but I guess the way in which you managed and led teams through that time of challenge and difficulty, and I guess your experiences from earlier in your career and ways of managing and working in difficult situations, and how that influenced your approach whilst with Oxfam at that stage.
Yeah, so I mean, in my second spell at Oxfam, we not only had the Oxfam crisis, which was more, it was a kind of communications media crisis. So my role within that was more working with other aid agencies, looking at the lessons we all had to learn in terms of changing the way we operated going forward, so that the kind of situation wouldn't be repeated. So I was involved leading a work stream which was set up by the Secretary of State at the time in terms of looking at different areas in which we as a sector could develop. And in doing that kind of work, it was obviously wearing the Oxfam hat, given the situation that was going on around us. I actually found the colleagues across the sector were incredibly supportive, and there's a real feeling that Oxfam had done a lot in recent years to kind of improve the way it was working with local communities and delivering, and it was an opportunity both to accept what had happened in the past, but to move forward and take some of that learning and broaden it across the sector. So it was challenging, but I wasn't actively involved in the kind of the media side of that challenge, which for our chief executive and deputy chief executive were clearly a very difficult time for them personally, and across in terms of the media side of life, it was very difficult. And to be in that environment when that's going on, again, there's lessons you pick up from that for the future going forward. I was also, while I was there, I led on a couple of more operational crises, and again, the nature of Oxfam means that you've got people working in very difficult situations, and occasionally things go wrong. And then you'd get a team together to kind of look at that, manage that situation, and work it through. So, for instance, we had a couple of members of staff killed on a project, and just dealing with the different aspects of what happens after a situation like that. And I think in those situations, you really get a lot from having a tight team that learns from each other, gets to know each other, and really know how you operate. We had what was an unfortunate situation, but we have about 3 different crises that all came along relatively quickly, and you just saw the kind of the learning that came from one to the next, working with the same group of people who came from different parts of the organisation but were pulled together to deal with that situation. And how we improved in our response as we went through. And I think it is key in terms of that whole crisis side that sometimes you do these kind of desk exercises and you just, well, why are we doing this? When something actually happens, you find out the true value of when you know what you're going to be doing in the first few minutes, etc. I mean, when we did a kind of simulation exercise once where we ran through a situation where basically the press were phoning you up before you'd heard about the situation through the organisational means, and this example where we had staff killed. I mean, literally, we had the press phoning up because they'd heard about it locally prior to the organisation really knowing what was going on. And just having that ability that instantly you've got the team there ready to go and you're ready to deal with the situation. And that kind of pre-planning is so important in those situations.
Yeah. And particularly, as you say, when it brings together so many different parts of the organisation that maybe aren't working together on a day-to-day basis in such an intense type of situation. And I guess the learnings that you take then.
And in those situations, it's with teams, international teams as well. So, you've got people at different parts of the world coming together in terms of virtual meetings to move things forward, and recognizing that often, with the international team, they're normally dealing with a close colleague, and where something has gone wrong, and they're having to manage the situation and also dealing with their personal feelings about what has happened. So it's an incredibly challenging time for them, but organizationally you need to get a grip of that situation and coordinate things to get the best possible outcome, both for the families of the people involved, but also how we can deal with it going forward. So it's about getting that balance right between that personal side and the operational needs to move the situation forward. These projects are delivering to many people, and you want to get the operation going again as quickly as you can in environments where it's safe and you can do so.
So experience, obviously, of working in an international context, and then managing as well, and then working within, obviously, within Oxfam, UK based, but with international projects, of course. How has that then, I guess, helped in your career progression to now, chief executive of a local regional charity here? I say here because I'm based in Hampshire, and in fact, the air ambulance is only sort of 10 minutes down the road from me, and regularly flies over the top of my office. I guess I'm interested into that transition to what in some ways feels quite a different sector within the charity sector, from international aid to. But of course, I mean, you've already said about the sort of the medical overlap, of course. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about that journey, and a bit more about Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance.
Yeah, so within my international career, I'd had a couple of spells out, working in other organisations. So I'd spent time with a community support organisation in Reading, Reading Voluntary Actions, that ran a volunteer centre and supported charities, gave advice, etc. And also did some time as the operations director of Gap Activity Projects, which was a year-out volunteering charity. So I'd had both international kind of connected experience within Gap, but then moved to very much more local, and also was chief exec of Health Watch Buckinghamshire. So again, that was very much chief exec experience, the health experience again, and so when I was kind of at a stage, at Oxfam, thinking what's next, I actually saw the job advertised when I wasn't necessarily particularly looking, and it just seemed to offer that complete cross across the fact that it was both, working with medical teams, it was the health industries, it was about how you bring community in to support you, etc., etc. And it just seemed to tick many of the boxes, but also be something very UK based and different in that sense, which I was looking to do in terms of moving to this kind of area. And it was even though Oxfam is clearly a massive organisation, I was a cog in the machine at Oxfam.
Sure.
In terms of the local organisation I worked for, they'd been relatively small, where I've been chief exec at two small organisations. And this presented that kind of middle ground and did cross over in terms of as I said, the medical side, etc., with a couple of things I'd done before. So it seemed to, when you read it and think, well, could I do that? And you're not sure, and then you apply and then think, well, actually, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. So I did go into it thinking, well, I've got no chance of getting this job because my background's all wrong. Yeah. And then almost as you write the application, you're thinking, well, I have done that and I have done this. And I've, these different things. And the nature of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance is we're not operationally delivering as a charity. So what I mean by that is that the pilots are employed by Babcock, a third party, and the engineers who support the helicopter. The medical crews are actually they're kind of recruited or work for the University Hospital of Southampton. And the charity team do the kind of what we call the engagement, so the community outreach part, the income side. And you're meshing those different parts of the organisation together, which was actually very, very similar to the role I was doing at Oxfam second time round as humanitarian lead, where I wasn't out there delivering projects. It was about facilitating, ensuring the funding was in place so that others could deliver. So, there are more and more crossovers that I realised, and clearly there were some because I applied and I got the job. So.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it sounds, I mean, I guess there's a complexity to managing stakeholders within an organisation like where you are at the moment, because there's obviously, such a range of individuals that are involved in organisations, businesses, and colleagues with, such a range of different skill sets. I wonder how, and you say, you take that experience from working in a humanitarian sector of being able to lead and to manage in that way. But I wonder where those, how you find working in that setting, and what approaches work well when it comes to that sort of stakeholder engagement and management and expectations coming at you from, I guess, a whole bunch of different angles.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things in terms of as a charity now, the Air Ambulance, we our turnover which came top 10 million last year, so we would be regarded as a large charity. But we're working with partners who, we're tiny. We're tiny compared to the hospital. We're tiny compared to Babcock. We're tiny compared to the ambulance service, who we work very closely with, so South Central Ambulance Service. So, it's where you look around the local charity sector and people are seeing us as a large organisation, but we're working with these, again, much larger organisations. And it's there is an element of getting airtime with them so that, we're able to get the kind of support that we need to make sure that we're delivering most effectively, and working with the kind of different cultures that come through from those organisations. In terms of staffing, our staff, relatively few of them on the medical side work for us full time. So, for instance, all the doctors will work within a hospital environment for, say, 50% of the time and 50% of the time with us. So they're very much coping with different cultures, different ways of working, and sometimes those they go across between the two organisations and two elements of work, and that sometimes throws up challenges. It throws up sometimes challenges when, I say, working with the hospital in terms of making sure that we are getting the kind of support that we require from them. It also offers us incredible benefits because we're getting support from people who are working in a major trauma centre, getting experience which they can truly use with us when they're out and about. And that kind of background in terms of support and training, etc., etc. So you do get issues, but at the same time, you get all these benefits, which, if you're working independently as a much smaller organisation, you would simply have no chance of replicating. And it's trying to toe that, or keep that line where you're getting enough of the benefits to make up for sometimes the bit of bureaucracy that can come into things as well. And I think, going from somewhere, I always remember between Oxfam and Reading Voluntary Action, where a Reading Voluntary Action, one day somebody's computer broke, and our office was about 100 metres from John Lewis. And I simply was able to hand them a credit card and say, go and get a new one. And then half an hour later, they've kind of turned it on and they're working again. Whereas in a larger organisation where you've got 17 different procurement processes, and then the machine's bought, it goes off to be fitted with all the right gizmos, and 6 months later you've got a computer. Now one is much more stable. The system's going to be right. That everything's been installed in the way the organisation needs in terms of broader security and all the rest of it. But you have to compensate the fact that all takes time, and there's many boxes to tick to get it done. And so, in all these things, it's about making sure you kind of get the right middle road, as it were, to try and get the best of both worlds, which is a lot easier to say than do.
Yes, I'm going to say it's not always that easy to navigate, is it? No. And understanding the, I guess the things that are priority for other individuals and stakeholders within that process. So yeah. And interested, you talked upon your fundraising team, but quickly changed that to engagement. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about what that journey's looked like, because I'm aware that obviously the engagement team at Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance have won awards recently. I quite often see Keith, obviously the director there, being invited to speak at different events about the innovative approaches that the team's been taking. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about how that works, evolved, developed in it's coming up 3 years that you've been there at the Air Ambulance.
Yeah, and so when I started, the organisation was just coming out of COVID. There'd been kind of quite a change in terms of numbers of the fundraising team. The fundraising director had just moved on, and there was clearly it was a moment where kind of had to think about what was going to will happen next. And the first thing was that there was a fundraising director and a director of kind of communications. And the first question was, well, do we replace the fundraising director, or do we look at this differently? And I mean, to be honest, as with most things, you look at what you've seen in the past, and then what can you nick, as it were, and what can you. And one of the changes at Oxfam that came in with the new chief executive was looking around the engagement as opposed to fundraising, and it was one of the things that I took away as a really good step in recognizing that it's not just about shaking a tin, as it were. It is all about a relationship, and that relationship not only about making sure that's a lifetime relationship in terms of donations to an organisation, but also in kind of the broader relationship. So whether that be around volunteering, or whether that be about people learning CPR or something, so that they can be part of the delivery of the organisation. And seeing, how can we see the community as very much a key part and key have that key kind of link in, because ultimately they are. Without the community in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, the organisation would not exist, because we get no government funding at all. So we are very dependent on the community. We have this massive supporter base of small donors who give regularly to us, and relatively few much larger donors, which is very different to many organisations. And it's kind of recognising that and trying to take that to the next stage. And clearly, with Keith starting to talk about looking at how do we take this forward, it seemed to fall quickly into place that the way we need to do this was to be talking about engagement rather than fundraising. And one of the key things was removing targets for fundraisers, because I'd be looking at the numbers of where things had come from, and you'd hear about some piece of work, and that was going under this banner, which you'd think, well, what's that got to do with corporate or community or whatever? And it would turn out, well, that particular piece of work had nothing to do with it, but so and so had done it. Therefore, it got put under there because that was in their pot, and that was that would go towards their target. So you got to a very kind of individual way of working within our team, as well as a very kind of today way of working. How much money can I bring in this month? And ultimately, it's not about what we bring in this month. It's about I see my job is about what's the organisation going to be like in 10 years' time, not what it's going to be this year.
Yeah.
And so we've set off on that journey, and the team themselves. Initially there was some concerns, maybe like you, Adam, in terms of if CV wise, as it were. If I put on my CV I'm the whatever engagement officer, nobody will know what that is. Yeah. Whereas if I'm a fundraising person, that's clear and people know that. So there was that kind of nervousness. There wasn't nervousness about the approach more generally. And actually, in reality, what's happened is, that the team have absolutely grabbed it, and as a result, they're now, well, obviously we don't like fundraising team of the year, given we don't do fundraising, but we've been the third sector fundraising team of the year. Is a massive achievement for the team, in what they've delivered. So, we're really taking that lifetime approach. We're not seeing people as just where's the next bit of money in the pot coming from, but how can we have a relationship with those people going forward to support the organisation?
Yeah, I wonder whether it was. I mean, was there a nervousness across the wider organisation, or even from board of trustees? I guess board, working with the board to say, well, look, we're going to take these individual targets away and this longer term view, because clearly there's, you're always looking at, well, this got to make sure that we're an ongoing concern, and we're still here and able to deliver services, and it's great to look that further ahead. But I mean, what did that kind of it's very easy to say, oh, we take this new
Yeah.
approach, but introducing a new strategy and takes time, and again bringing people with you on that journey.
I think sometimes when you're new, you get that kind of the new bounce, as it were, where people are kind of
Sure.
they bring somebody new in. They had, like I said, there'd been the whole COVID thing, so people were ready to look at different approaches and different ways of doing things. So it kind of, there was an expectation that things would change, I think. And so definitely we got that kind of new kid on the block bounce, as it were, in terms of getting some of these ideas pushed through. But also we had a really good security blanket in terms of a lot of our income comes from lottery traditionally. And one of the challenges had for the organisation had been that it was very dependent on lottery income, with relatively few other streams in terms of value. And they wanted to change that. So we wanted to have a more kind of leveled out income approach. So things which were looking at new ways of doing that were very much accepted and taken on board. So I have to say we got it through remarkably smoothly.
Good.
And luckily, in terms of it's made kind of returns. I've talked about a 10-year plan to ensure we got income in 10 years' time, but actually income has been improving in the short term. So we're seeing the immediate benefits as long as as well as the longer term. And I think those immediate benefits come because we've got a very motivated team who are going out there doing new things, and really delivering for the organisation. And also, we're very lucky to have a very motivated community who support the organisation. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do all these things. But we're really just giving avenues to allow people to engage more.
Yeah, absolutely. And remind me how much it costs to fund the air ambulance on per day.
So annual costs are just over 10 million. So it's kind of £3,500 a day. Sorry, a mission normally. So it's kind of 15 grand a day. So it's not a cheap endeavour.
No.
If you're dealing with helicopters and crew, etc., then it's an expensive operation that we need to keep going. But like I said, thanks not only in recent years, but historically, the organisation is now 18 years old. We're in the very fortunate position as well that we have good reserves, so that, again, I suppose that gave some security to trustees when we're looking at new ways that if things did go wrong, they could change course very quickly with that kind of reserves in the bank, as it were. It's an expensive organisation to run, but at the moment we're able to pull in the funds to support it on a yearly basis.
Yeah, which is remarkable. And like you say, you don't receive government funding, which I think, for members of the public, it can be very easy to just think, well, it's the air ambulance. It's a part of the emergency service that's there at the end of 999 if and when it's ever needed. But actually, clearly, it's a charitable organisation that's reliant on the generosity of the general public. So to be able to keep it flying.
Some of the most difficult conversations I've had since I started this job have been with angry supporters who cannot believe that we don't get any government funding, and it's quite hard to have those conversations with people. It's not down to me. I didn't make this happen, but there's an expectation, and for a lot of people, they believe we are funded and part of the NHS. That's not the case. We don't receive any funding from the state, and ultimately, though, we are delivering to a small cohort of people. Now, they are a cohort of people who really need that level of support. We're the most injured, through most traumatic injuries or medical emergencies. But it's probably about, it's a tiny percentage of what the ambulance service will be dealing with on a daily basis. And ultimately, it comes down, it is a numbers game, and you've got those large cohort of people, kind of something like 99.7% of people who need support will be dealt with by the ambulance service. A lot of people, a lot of calls, and and they do a fantastic job. There are just those situations where a paramedic in a road ambulance just has not got the same level of experience to deal with a situation, because they won't come across it that often. Whereas our crews, because they're targeting those situations on a daily basis and working in the hospitals, etc., they have experience of the most traumatic situations on a much more regular basis, and therefore they've got the experience and training to be able to deal with it. So we are dealing with what to the ambulance service is relatively small numbers, but in a way that you couldn't expect road crews to be able to deal. And it wouldn't be necessary for them to be trained to the kind of levels our crews are trained, because they don't come across the kind of incidents we do every day, because they're not happening that frequently, thankfully, for the local populations. We're looking at kind of 5 incidents a day on average. However, those 5 incidents, that's potentially 5 lives we might be saving on which wouldn't happen if we weren't around, because the crews wouldn't have that higher level of training. So all jobs are different. Sometimes we're just there kind of supporting the Scouts team that and giving a little extra help. Sometimes it's somebody who really needs support, otherwise they wouldn't make it as far as the hospital. So it's a very different role.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much sort of cross-working takes place amongst the different air ambulances across the UK? Because obviously, there's more than 20, I think, air ambulances across the UK. Yeah. Is there that kind of working together and shared learning and resources that bring the organisations together?
Yes, so there's an umbrella body called Air Ambulances UK who kind of link up the different air ambulances, so that we're talking, collaborating, etc. But on a more local level, we also work closely with our neighbours, and operationally we work very closely. So on a daily basis, we'll be nipping over each other's borders, as it were. It's not like the helicopter gets to the edge of Hampshire and then stops and turns around and
stops.
We'll go into Andover, where we're based at the moment. It's very close to Salisbury. So if there's something in Salisbury, which is in the Wiltshire ambulance patch, we'll sometimes go across there. Sometimes other air ambulances will come and help us. Clearly, we've got one crew on most of the time. So if 2 things are happening at the same time and a neighbouring air ambulance is available, then they will come and support. So that kind of what we call mutual aid is very much part of the system, where we're helping each other operationally, because that gives us all more capacity across the country to do multiple things at the same time. And then there's the learning from each other. I talk once a month to the Dorset CEO, just kind of picking up on what's going on with them and sharing lessons, sharing learning. So we do that kind of informal chats. Like I said, one of the other CEOs, it's an old university friend. So again, we have those networks, as well as the formal things we do. And within the medical crews, a lot of the doctors, and especially the paramedics who have worked for the ambulance service across different patches, they all know each other from many years, and so again, you have that kind of shared learning that goes on.
Yeah, indeed, and that peer-to-peer learning is so critical, so vital. And for you as chief executive of an organisation, obviously you do that peer-to-peer learning with other chief executives within the air ambulance network as well. I mean, I'm always people talk to me about it can sometimes be a bit lonely to be a chief executive. I'm not always so convinced as to how true that is, but I mean, are there different places that you get support or learning or coaching, mentoring, that kind of support as well in your role?
Yeah, so I think there are lots of different places. So in terms of like I just said, in terms of my conversations with the Dorset CEO, they're sharing experiences in a kind of informal, off the record, and we're just having a chat basically, but can learn a lot from each other because we're both relatively. I've been here nearly 3 years now, and I still call myself relatively new. But in terms of that learning journey. We're still relatively new, so we can pick that up together, as well as the other CEOs around that network that I might talk to. But within my own team, my deputy's been with the organisation virtually since it started. So again, you've got that history and person you can turn to for support in that way. And then there's the trustee board, and not only the chair, who you have a kind of more formal relationship with, but other members of that trustee board, which will have expertise in different areas. So you can go to different people for different aspects of what's going on. So there's actually quite a lot of areas of support. And I think the other thing about chief exec role is that sometimes people think, well, chief exec, you can just do anything because you're the chief exec, so why can't you? But actually, in reality, you've got a lot of bosses, and you've got a lot of people who are working with you that you kind of need to be ensure that you're working with and have a lot of knowledge, etc. So I don't think either way. I don't think you're ever just on your own, and I don't think you are this person that can just make all the decisions and move things on. It's a real mix of, you do have that support, but you also need to be taking people in terms of decision making in all directions along the journey of, and it's more about that facilitation aspect than it is necessarily having this single bright idea and driving it through, as it were. It's making sure you're getting the best bits from all the different parts of the organisation.
Yeah, Richard, it's been a really fascinating conversation. I think that word facilitation actually has been one that you've used a few times in your approach to the way that you've managed and led teams and operations in a whole host of different areas, from obviously military to international aid to small local charity to now where you are with your air ambulance. So I'm really grateful and thankful for you to taking the time today to speak to us. My final question, Richard, would be, and putting you ever so slightly on the spot, I think, but if you were to go back to the start of your career and be able to give yourself a piece of advice from obviously what you now know what do you think you'd say to your younger self?
Gosh, so I suppose it's my career's gone all over the shop into the different places, and people would say that when I was younger, I'd have probably thought, well, you need to know where you're going and have a logical pattern of how you're going to work it through. But ultimately, why? As long as you're enjoying the role that you're doing, as long as you are getting to a point where you're saying, actually, this is the kind of thing I'd like to do next, and there's some connection, so that there's something in that experience that you can move across to a different context, then, there's no harm in changing directions. There is learning from lots of different environments, which does translate, does move across. It's sometimes just stepping back and thinking, actually, I have done that. And when you're reading a job description, you often start thinking, well, I can't do that. And then you think, oh no, that actually, by that they mean that. And you suddenly realize that actually there's all sorts of things that you can do, and you have the experience and background to do, but you maybe don't see it first straight in your face.
Yeah, that's right, indeed. So trusting those skills and those experiences, and and I think the sector absolutely gives people opportunities beyond what they might have expected, and the opportunity to flourish in their careers. So, Richard, again, a huge thank you from us. When we put this out there, just to check that you're happy that we sort of tag you on LinkedIn. If people have got questions or things they want to fire your way, are you happy that they sort of contact you that way? Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. And if I just throw in there, because at the moment, in terms of that, we're currently looking at potentially moving our airbase. And so at this stage in my career, I'm suddenly got into property. And, you are continuously learning and continuously having to look out for other people that can provide you support in developing these projects, because ultimately you can't be an expert in all these things. And anyone interested in supporting development of an airbase, then we're in the market, and hopefully it's a project we're going to be able to take forward in the next year or so.
Yeah, which clearly is obviously a huge project. And I suppose if people type in Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance into Google, they can find the website and more details on there and what's going on. So great. Lovely. Well, again, a huge thanks, Richard. And look, it sounds like we're going to have to do this again in the future and hear more of how things have progressed and how things are going. But it's been lovely to catch up today, and thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Adam. Been good to talk to you.
And that's a wrap for this week on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Remember, you can be the change you want to see in the world. We hope that this episode has inspired you to get out there and make a difference. This podcast was brought to you by Charisma Charity Recruitment, one of the UK's leading recruitment consultancies for the charity sector. Whether you're a passionate professional seeking your next challenge or a charity searching for a top-tier talent, Charisma Charity Recruitment can help. Visit their website at charismarecruitment.co.uk to explore their latest positions and to connect your organisation with the change makers shaping the future of the non-profit world. Thanks for joining us.